Okay, so this is all thumbs. I just wanted to at least do a quick run through so you had some idea what's going on. Clear terminal does exactly what you'd imagine. It clears the terminal. Save terminal is just to save whatever's in this big text box. Really wouldn't be much point unless I kind of asked you to for some specific purpose, which would probably coincide with something like show event info and show serial data being checked. Now, you don't want to leave these checked other than just for troubleshooting because, it just eventually it's going to take up a lot of memory as it slowly fills up this box. Same with log data. Log data just kind of logs everything behind the scenes and then allows you to dump log, which will just dump everything into this text area, or save it, which will, as you can imagine, save it. I think when you hit dump, it puts it in here, but then it clears out the actual log that's in memory, just FYI. But this is useful. These options down here are useful if you're just wanting to see what the heck is going on. You see that it's pinging for connection. All that is just, it's just talking to the box and making sure that it's responding. And if it doesn't respond, then it just basically clicks disconnect and reconnect. Just kind of an extra failsafe. One thing that I've run into very, very randomly is like I've opened up the app and everything initializes fine, which here, let me disconnect. And let me clear these checks out. So this would be like from scratch. Hit connect. It says connecting, sending data terminal ready, which basically resets the box and boots it up. And it's gotten to this point where everything looks fine and the sip and puff works, the pinging works, but something with the touchpad didn't initialize, and so like it doesn't get any touchpad input. Now what I've noticed is when it connects, which is probably 98% of the time it connects fine and the touchpad is fine, it never seems to stop working. So as long as it's booted up and it's recognizing, I've had it run overnight, I come in the morning and I touch the touchpad and I can see that it wakes up the screen and everything's working as normal. So, but just as an FYI. Now in terms of show event info, that's basically just showing things that are happening. For example, I'm going to just single tap in the middle area of the pad. It says tap detected, starts the double tap timer to see if you're actually tapping twice, and then it says, oh, timer reached, so we're just going to send the left click because you didn't double click. If I double tap somewhere in the middle, then it says, oh, wait a minute, there we go, I didn't tap fast enough. Send left double click, and I'm gonna just do a single tap in the upper right defined corner, and there it goes. It waited a little bit and then it detected that I wasn't doing two taps, so it said okay, then we're gonna just send the right click. Now if you show serial data, that's gonna show everything that's coming from the box. I don't have the tube over here, it's kind of a little bit away, but it'll show the sip and puff pressures as you blow in and or as you suck in and blow out. And when you touch and move, it's going to show you the coordinates. F means finger, means that there's a finger on the touchpad. You can see it's basically X, Y. I'm pointing at the screen, but you can't see me. It's the coordinates there are X, Y of the touchpad, and then the last one is Z. It's really just the pressure that the touchpad is reporting, how hard it's being pressed. It doesn't have it has like the lightest I think I can get is somewhere in the 40s, and then the hardest I can get is like maybe into the 90s. So, just FYI for whatever that's worth. And if I do a tap, it actually sends a G because it's considered a gesture, which is something that's built into the touchpad itself, just recognizing taps basically. And if you click on the left and the right buttons, which I don't think you'll be doing, they just send L and R. Okay, so that's what that's about. Don't want to leave any of these checked unless it's necessary, just for memory purposes. So, touchpad tap. All right, minimum force. This correlates to that number that I was talking about a second ago, the third of that coordinate. It's basically the minimum amount of pressure necessary for this app to deem that it should respond to it. So if for some reason you're finding that your thumb is resting on the pad a little bit and it's giving it 50, and you want it to only recognize when it's a little bit harder than that, then you could certainly do that. Like I said, the touchpad doesn't have a whole lot of depth in that axis of pressure, so probably will just be whatever's coming in is coming in. The double tap timeout is what you probably would imagine. It's how long it waits, and this is in milliseconds, how long it waits between one tap until it says, okay, we're not tapping again. So I'm going to go ahead and do the single tap. So if for some reason you find that you need a little bit more time, you can increase that. So 500 milliseconds would be a half a second. 1,000 would be 1 full second. Acceleration boost is just the boost, the extra pixels essentially added to those axes, to the Y and X when you move the mouse. And if you disable the acceleration, then it's just 1 to 1. I don't know if I even hit that right. Oh no, that's the acceleration. So then it becomes just kind of 1 to 1 instead of having the extra boost in there. Pad left, right, top and bottom just defines the coordinates that are the boundaries that I was able to find. For the most part, it's not really necessary to adjust these, but just in case you needed to. Or this was probably made for someone else was plugging in some other touchpad that was still compatible and they needed to change the coordinates. It is using the math in terms of determining this area and this area, which perfect segue is what these are. So these coordinates are they just define where on the touchpad itself are the boundaries of the rectangle. So the left is here. Now you can see that left starts at 70, which is here. 1050 is over here. So we're saying we're starting at 500, which is here. And we're going all the way to the far edge to the right of the pad. And we're starting 90 from the top because that's kind of where the pad starts to report an upper coordinate. And the bottom is 310 from 90. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Obviously, you can, let's see, so if we increase this, you can see it's moving the left boundary further and further away because it's getting higher from this axis. Disable events. For the most part, I put that in there because I was trying to test things and I realized there probably wouldn't be any practical purpose for you because then you wouldn't be able to use the mouse at all. This just disables it, so anything you do on the touchpad doesn't actually cause anything. And this was so when I was testing this part to see where things were highlighting, it wasn't actually moving the mouse, and when I was double tapping, it wasn't actually trying to fire anything. But it does let you move around, and so you can kind of see when it's in those rectangles, because I know you needed to be able to kind of gauge it in the beginning of a session, but probably just don't check that. Upper right. This determines the double tap action. Right now it toggles acceleration from being on, which uses these, to off, which just uses essentially a 1-to-1 for the most part. Or you can say use a script, and if you double tap, it'll send this script, whatever script is in here, to strokesplus.net, assuming it's running, of course. And the same kind of goes for lower right. For the most part, it sends a script. This doesn't have an option to turn it on and off. You can comment it out or delete all this, and it'll just send nothing. Actually, it won't send it if there's nothing in there. But that's for double tap because I wasn't sure what you wanted to do down in that corner. I did have it changing the color of this form, this whole app for some reason, just because I wanted to have something in there, but it seemed like this would be a lot more useful. So I just realized that I'm capturing at the app level here, so I can't show you any scrolling. Actually, maybe I can under Sip and Puff. So this double tap and hold, the scroll ticks and scroll threshold, essentially it's, you tap in the lower right corner. So you tap 2 times pretty quick, obviously, based on that threshold, whatever the value is. And so you tap and then you tap, but on the second tap you hold to scroll. I'm sure that you get what I mean here. So in this case, I'm double tap, hold, and then I'm scrolling. So I double tapped and held in the lower right, and I'm moving my thumb up and down to scroll. So the scroll ticks is how many essentially wheel scrolls it sends per threshold. So if you move 20 pixels, and I believe this is touchpad pixels, so for every 20 touchpad pixels you move, it sends 1 scroll tick. So you may want to decrease this if you want it to be more sensitive. I set it to a relatively safe one. Downside is that you can't move your thumb too far until sometimes you get out of the area or you touch the bottom part of the pad, because once you get there, it it thinks you're not touching the pad anymore. So then the scrolling stops. But that's what that's about. You can lower this to make it more sensitive, and you can increase this to amplify how much it scrolls per recognition. Cursor glide. This is what I just stole from some AutoHotkey script, and I converted into C# code. So these numbers are all really whack and unintuitive for the most part, but I didn't want to rewrite or recreate the wheel, so I just left everything as they had it for the most part. So you can tinker with these. I don't really know what the difference is. I can tell that increasing speed does seem to make it go a little faster. It's not super sensitive, so I think you have to jump it up a pretty good amount to really notice it. Like you jump it up to 80 and you'll tell when you glide the cursor. Let's see. I wonder if I can get that to happen within this window here. There it goes. It kind of went off screen, obviously. But so I'm just touching on the pad, sliding my finger a little, and then letting it up, and then it's detecting the glide. And then it just carries it on based on all these crazy trigonometry or whatever the heck they got going on here. Minimum distance. This is probably other than speed, I'm thinking these are probably the two that you'll tweak. Minimum distance basically is a projected distance. So when you touch and drag and then you release, it calculates using all these crazy figures about how far it thinks the movement has really gone, or how far it would end up going. And if it doesn't cross this threshold, then it won't cursor glide. That's so you don't move the mouse a little bit, and then you quickly move, and then you let go, and then it's just like, okay, I'm carrying the mouse away. No, it'll do that. Acceleration mode, obviously I have it set for a further distance, and for non-acceleration mode, which is what this side is. This is when you're not in acceleration mode, then it's only 100. Otherwise, you really had to swipe hard to get it to even glide anywhere. So you can tinker with those, and you'll kind of get a feel for where it's at. Sip and puff. What a big mess this is, huh? So it technically works, but it's a hot mess. But this is how we are right now. All right. These ones you're probably going to tinker with a bit to really find a happy spot. So the SIP threshold is how much pressure in HPA, which I feel like I should have already looked up exactly what that is, but the atmosphere is right around 1,000-ish, so this is 10 parts away from that atmosphere pressure. It seems to be a pretty good amount. On mine, I have it for 24, but that's only because I don't have my box enclosed, so it really is constantly tripping false puffs. It seems like when it gets light on it, it looks like it errors more on the side of puff. So I think in the default I have this set for 5, because what I found out is that sipping is really easy to drop pressure quite a bit from the 1,000-ish atmosphere-ish. You can get it down to 600 without a problem. Puffing, on the other hand, entirely a different story. It takes a lot of pressure to get up there. So I think in the default I have this puff actually set for 5. So you can tinker with it and see. One good way to test this is if you do set these to some settings, you come to the terminal and say show serial, and then you do a sip and a puff, and you'll kind of see it'll only show up here when it crosses that threshold. When you set these, anytime you change these values, it actually sends an update to the board inside the box to tell it what the new threshold is for sip or puff. Detect duration. This is essentially how long it waits to detect a sip or a puff. Turns out it's exceedingly difficult to really get that just right when you're doing a sip. How do you know when it stops? I mean, you could wait till it gets back to baseline, but there's a lot of complications in it. So this is essentially how long it waits to do a sampling of, like, okay, you're sipping. So you'll probably tinker with this, and you'll get a feel for it, because if you come over here and you turn the serial data on and you start sipping, it'll say, oh, sip recognized and an additional one added. And if you try to sip too quick in succession, like sip, 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 and it's not long enough for that threshold, then you'll notice it's not recognizing that there's another sip added. So I think it'll make sense as you're tinkering with it. Detection timeout is essentially how long it waits until after it doesn't get a sip or a puff, when it determines, okay, I think you're not adding any more sips or puffs, so I'm going to go ahead and try to evaluate what sip and puff sequence occurred to see what action to take. So yeah, you certainly want to tinker with that. This is set to a ½ second by default. The active timeout, that applies. So the way it works, the way I have it set up here, that's what these two areas here and here are. This is the active sip and the active puff script, and this is the initial script. So essentially what happens is when you do, in this example here, when you do 3 sips, so you do 3 sips, which each happen within a ½ second of each other, and then after a ½ second, it says, okay, execute this script, because we've detected this kind of, I'll say, gesture. I'm doing air quotes right now, but I'm doing so we recognize this gesture, and it sends the script. And then if you do another sip or puff, and many, you can do one or more, before this active timeout, then it will send either this or this script. So the thinking here was, it recognizes the sip sequence, then it sends some command, and then you can do subsequent sip puff. Like, I don't know, imagine you're steering a race car in a game, like that, other app that you showed me. It's like, all right, sip is left and puff is right, and as long as you keep doing it as long as there's another sip or puff before this times out, it'll keep doing it. So it keeps resetting. Every time it detects the sip, it says, okay, start counting from 2 seconds again, and etc. So you could sip and puff, and it'll just keep executing this script, that script. Now, there are some issues with that in terms of the amount of sip data that comes from the box, because it can send a lot of these scripts, and Strokes Plus only processes so many per second, and so these events can actually back up some. I intended to add some kind of an active minimum time, like, don't literally send every single new reading that you get. Here, let me grab this tube just so I can show you the data here. So if we pop over here, I say show serial data, I'll clear this out. Now I'm gonna do a sip, and then you can see how much data comes in here. See, it's kind of flying by. I mean, the whole time I was just sipping. So every single one of these during an active event would be executing this script over and over again. And just the nature of things, it can't execute them all that fast, so then they end up getting a little bit queued up. So we can kind of tinker with that. I do think that probably some other kind of a threshold of timeout, like only send it every 25 milliseconds or something, and then it would discard all the ones that happen between there. But we'll see. Depends on how much usage you even get out of this. So this is kind of like your gesture list here, basically. You can make a new sip puff action. You can say add sip, add a puff, puff, and then that's the sequence. So sip, puff, puff. Okay, and then it does this when it recognizes it. Doesn't really have a lot of error checking and name collision and seeing if there's already another action that has the same sips and puffs and all that, because that's all very time consuming stuff. It doesn't have any up downs. You can just clear it to kind of start it over if you mess up something. These down here are really, I just wanted to put them in here because they are something that happens within Allthumbs. They're specific to this just to make sure that we can send data over to Strokes Plus in some way, and whatever we need to, so we can know the sip or puff direction, where on the touchpad the point occurred, and what the pressure was. And so that's what all these are. This is, if you put this here, then that equals this in a Strokes Plus script. And wherever this with the braces, the curly braces are included, they're part of the token, then it'll either send a S or a P. So don't really have to get into that. I mean, you can kind of see it a little bit in play here, I think down here. Yeah, see, like, oh, sends a message, sip, and it says sip puff direction. So but I imagine we'll work together on that stuff if you kind of come up with sip puff actions. And then obviously you can delete it. You can hit save. It will save if you change between these, but if there's not like an OK to close this whole window. So if you're tinkering with something and you want to test it, you just hit save right away, and then you can do the sip puff sequence and see if it's working out. And options, connect at startup, probably an option you want to have enabled. So it just boots up and connects to the box. Send DTR, recommend leaving this on by default. Basically it sends data terminal ready, which you kind of saw. Oh, I guess I cleared the terminal, but it shows up over there. Essentially what that does on these Arduino boards is they kind of take care of, they watch that line and it pulls the microprocessor reset. So it's just a good way to make sure that it reboots the board. So that's all. It just basically makes sure it reboots whenever it connects, so that way, if there was any memory issues or anything like that, they'll be cleared out from the board. And minimize to tray does what you'd think it does, but since I'm only capturing this window, I'm not going to do it because then it would disappear. There is a tray icon down there which looks just like this little thumb. Oh, you can't see it. I don't have that in the screen. It's not capturing the title bar. Oh well, you'll see it. And confirm exit is just, to make sure before you close it, because obviously if it's closed, then nothing's working on the touchpad or the sip and puff. So probably a good idea to have it on just to be safe. Well, I guess I can kind of touch on these. So if you don't have any other COM devices, then it's probably going to be the only one. I do have it set up so when you start the app, it does kind of go through all the available COM ports and it tries to send that ping, which the board should respond with that high response, and then it knows, okay, that's the port where it is. Obviously I just have my one machine. I don't know what kind of things are out there in the real world in terms of if that was going to blow up if there's some other COM device, but you can certainly pick it. When you plug it in, darn it, I'm not going to be able to see it. Anyway, when you connect, if you go in Device Manager, it will show under like ports, it'll be serial, and you'll see, well, I can at least open it up and tell you, I can read it off anyway. So it's ports, common LPT, expand that and you'll see Silicon Labs, CP210, USB to UART bridge, and on my system it says in parentheses COM5. I did notice that each device that I plug in does get its own COM port, even though they're all the same like little board. It's like they have IDs inside, so it actually recognizes them differently. So in theory, once you get it connected once, it should remember it, because this does save when you exit in terms of what the last COM port was. Refresh just looks to see. So if you open this app up before the device was connected, it wouldn't have any COM ports in here, and you can hit refresh to see it connect. Obviously connects. Oh yeah, you know what, I should probably clear this out. Let's clear this and I'll say, oh, I did have it already selected. I've had a glass of wine. Okay, so connect, and in this way you can see all of the things that are being spit back. So it gives you the baseline pressure, which is 1,000, what the current sip, and oh, you can see, you see it. See, it's picking up these, wait a minute, what'd that do? Oh, no response. That's interesting. It's like it reconnected because it didn't get this echo. I wonder if I'm not sending it on the first time, because see, it didn't try. Alright, let me turn this off so it stops scrolling, because it says ready, and this one is when it sent the sip threshold, and this is when it sent the puff threshold to the board to store the setting, and then it timed out and said there's no response, because it was expecting a response when it sent the echo, and it didn't get back RQS high, so it reconnected. Whatever, not a big deal. It clearly was working after the first little loop, so that's fine if it did reset it twice. Go through these tabs again, make sure there's nothing else that is important. Nope, I think that's good for now.